Frozen German shepherds beg a man to enter the house. He's shocked by what happens next. The wind hit the cabin like a fist, shaking the old timber walls as if trying to tear them apart. In the Cascade Mountains, winter didn't whisper. It roared. The moon was a faint, frozen coin behind storm clouds, and the world beyond Elias Turner's windows was nothing but moving white. Inside, the fire cracked with the low patience of someone who had seen too much. Elias sat on the edge of his worn leather chair, steaming mug in hand, letting the heat numb the knuckles that still ached from years of search and rescue work. He had come out here to disappear, to let the world shrink to a single point of light inside a cabin built for one. Then came the scratching. At first it was faint, almost lost to the wind. But it came again, and again, urgent, desperate, not the frantic scrabble of a raccoon, not the weighty scrape of a bear. Something smaller, softer, shaking. Then he heard it. A whine. Elias froze, mug halfway to his lips. The sound cut through the storm like a blade, so out of place it made every instinct flare awake. He set the mug down, stood, and reached for the flashlight on the table. His heartbeat quickened as he crossed the room, boots heavy on the wooden floor. He paused at the door, listening. Another whine, this time weaker. Against reason, against training, Elias cracked the door open. Cold exploded inside, hitting him squarely in the chest. Snow whirled past him in a blinding rush. He lifted the flashlight and swept the beam across the porch. 2 German shepherds stood in the halo of light. Both were male. Both were barely upright. The larger one had frost crusting the edges of his muzzle, his breath ragged like a wheezing engine. His coat was thick but soaked, paws trembling in the drifting snow. The smaller shepherd leaned into him heavily, one leg held awkwardly off the ground, as though the cold had reached deep into the bone. Their eyes were what stopped Elias cold. Not wild, not feral, pleading. The bigger shepherd stepped forward, shoulder brushing the door frame, and lowered his head. A gesture of trust so clear, so human-like, Elias felt something shift inside his ribcage. He whispered without meaning to. "You've got to be kidding me." The last time he had seen a German shepherd this close was 4 years ago, when Ranger died in his arms under a collapsed ridge. Since then, Elias had built his life around avoiding reminders. Yet here stood 2, battered by the same mountains that once took everything from him. His instincts screamed caution. Wolves, dogs, it didn't matter. Cornered animals were unpredictable, and these 2 were clearly trained. Their posture, their stillness, the way the larger shepherd positioned himself to shield the smaller one. It was textbook working dog behavior, which meant something else. Someone had trained them. Someone might be nearby. The larger dog whimpered once, not in fear, in exhaustion. The decision felt like it wasn't his at all. Elias swung the door wider. The warmth spilled out like a blessing. "Come on," he murmured. "Get inside before you freeze to death." The big shepherd nudged the smaller forward, guiding him over the threshold. Snow melted instantly under their paws. The smaller dog stumbled, almost collapsing, but the larger shepherd pressed against him, steadying him with steady loyalty that struck Elias harder than the cold. He closed the door quickly, cutting off the howl of the storm. For a moment the 3 of them just stood there in the amber glow of the fire. Elias watched their chests rise and fall in uneven, shuddering breaths. The dogs scanned the space, not aggressively, but alertly, as if evaluating whether the cabin was truly safe. The larger shepherd's eyes landed on Elias. He stared with an intensity that felt unnervingly aware, like he was trying to read the man in front of him. "You're not strays," Elias whispered. "Someone worked with you. Someone taught you." The wind pounded on the walls as if urging him to act. He crouched slowly, hands open, letting them catch his scent. The smaller shepherd took a shaky step towards him, then another, before lowering his head against Elias's knee. Elias felt the warmth of him through the denim, the tremor in the dog's muscles. That was when he saw it. A faint line under the collar. Not a regular collar, a tactical one. Government issue. And beneath the fur at the neck of the larger shepherd, something metallic glinted. A microchip port. His breath caught. These weren't just dogs. These were working dogs. And they hadn't run away. They had been running toward something. Toward him. A sudden thud hit the outside wall of the cabin. Not wind. He knew the difference instantly. Something or someone had brushed past the siding. The larger shepherd reacted first. His ears shot forward. His body stiffened like a drawn bow, and a low growl built in his chest. The smaller dog backed closer to Elias, pressing against his leg, trusting him instinctively. Elias moved to the window, lifting the edge of the curtain just enough to peer out. Nothing but swirling white. But he felt it. That shift in the air. That presence in the storm. Someone watching. Someone searching. The big shepherd moved to Elias's side, muscles coiled, gaze locked on the tree line. "What happened to you boys?" Elias whispered. "And what's out there looking for you?" The growl deepened. The storm howled. And for the first time in years, Elias Turner felt that old surge of adrenaline returning, the one he thought he'd buried for good. Not fear. Purpose. The hook was no longer a question. It was a warning. 2 German shepherds had come to his door for a reason, and whatever they were running from was now standing somewhere in the blizzard beyond his cabin walls. The cabin warmed slowly, swallowing the cold that clung to the 2 German shepherds like a second skin. Snow melted off their coats in tiny rivulets, pooling on the floorboards. Elias tossed another log into the fire, the flames rising with a soft roar. The room glowed orange, revealing details he hadn't noticed in the chaos of the storm. The smaller shepherd lay curled near the hearth, shivering but conscious. His back leg was swollen, the fur around it stiff with ice. Every time he tried to shift his weight, a faint whimper escaped him. The larger dog, broad-shouldered and steady, hovered closely, nudging his partner back down each time he tried to stand. His vigilance was unmistakable. He positioned himself between the injured dog and the rest of the room, protective without being hostile. Elias crouched beside them, hands open, voice low. "Easy, boys. I'm not here to hurt you." The large shepherd studied him with eyes that reflected intelligence rather than fear. Elias felt the weight of that gaze. It wasn't the panicked stare of a stray. It was the assessment of a trained working dog reading him the way he used to read terrain maps. The smaller shepherd licked Elias's wrist when he reached out, surprising him with a flicker of trust. Elias ran his fingers along the injured leg, careful and slow. The dog flinched, muscles tightening, but he did not pull away. Ice burn on the paw, possibly a strain or tendon pull. He looked up at the larger shepherd. The big one watched every movement, breathing steady but tense. Elias muttered softly, "All right, partner, I won't hurt him." Partner. The word slipped out before he could stop it. It tightened something in his chest. The memory came without warning. A mountain ridge, the sound of cracking ice, ranger's bark slicing through the wind, then nothing but a fall, a scream, and the hollow silence that replaced a heartbeat he knew as well as his own. Elias inhaled sharply, forcing the memory back. Not now, not here. He stood and grabbed his old SAR medic bag from the closet. It had dust on the zipper, like it hadn't been touched since he walked away from the job. As he kneeled again, his hands worked from memory, steady despite the emotions gnawing at him. Warm compress, ointment for the paw pads, a loose wrap to protect the leg. He applied each piece of care with the precision he had once used in the field. The larger dog's posture softened with each passing minute. By the time Elias finished bandaging, the big shepherd sat beside him, almost shoulder to shoulder. Close enough that Elias could feel the heat of him. Close enough that he sensed the dog was making a decision about him. "You two have been trained," Elias murmured. "Someone taught you teamwork, discipline, trust. So why are you alone out here?" The larger dog blinked slowly, as if he understood the question. Elias stood and moved to the kitchen area, searching for leftover meat. He found a sealed package in the freezer, thawed it near the fire, and split it into 2 modest portions. When he placed the bowls down, he stepped back to give them space. The smaller shepherd sniffed, then ate without hesitation. The larger one waited until the smaller had his share before moving to his own bowl. Loyal, calculated, controlled, definitely trained. And then it happened. The larger shepherd snapped his head towards the far window. Not a flinch, not curiosity, a full instinctive reaction. His ears pricked forward, his entire body leaned into the sound. The growl that rose in his throat was low, but sharp enough to cut the room in half. Elias froze. "What is it?" The dog didn't look at him. He stared past him, locking onto something outside. The injured dog whimpered, scrambling closer to Elias, pressing against his leg with sudden urgency. Elias crossed the cabin in 3 steps and peered through the frost-coated window. Snow drifted in thick curtains, shifting shapes and shadows. The wind hissed across the eaves. Nothing. No movement. No silhouette. But the large shepherd knew. Elias could see it in the rigid line of his spine, the high alert in his stare. This wasn't random anxiety. This was recognition. Something familiar was close. A scent, a pattern, a threat. Elias whispered, "Who's out there?" The dog didn't break focus. The storm rattled the window. A branch cracked somewhere in the woods. The smaller shepherd pressed harder into Elias, trembling again, but this time not from the cold. The air inside the cabin changed. Heavy. Watchful. Elias felt it in the marrow of his bones, the same sensation he'd felt moments before. An avalanche took Ranger away. The mountain had moods. It had warnings. So did dogs trained to face danger. Another sound cut through the wind. A faint crunch, slow, purposeful. Footsteps in deep snow. Human. Elias stepped back from the window, pulse spiking. He looked at the large shepherd, who was now standing, weight evenly balanced, ready. The dog glanced briefly at Elias, and in that microsecond their instincts aligned. Someone was following these dogs. Someone who wasn't afraid of a blizzard. Someone close. The wind roared again, shaking the cabin like a warning call. Elias reached for the old hunting flashlight near the door, flicked it on, and steadied his breath. He whispered to the dogs, "Stay close." But the larger shepherd had already moved to the door, positioning himself between Elias and the outside world, hackles raised, eyes hard as cut stone. That was when Elias understood something with absolute clarity. These dogs didn't arrive by accident. They came here for a reason, and whatever they were running from in the storm had finally caught up to them. Morning came slowly, a pale light pressing through the frost on the cabin windows like a hesitant visitor. The storm had moved on, leaving behind a silence so deep it felt carved from ice. Elias Turner woke in the armchair by the dying fire, blanket still draped over the 2 German shepherds resting at his feet. The larger dog was already awake, watching him with steady amber eyes. The smaller one slept curled tight, bundled in, warmth that contrasted sharply with the brutal night they had survived. Elias pushed himself upright, joints stiff. "All right, let's see how bad it is." He crouched beside the injured shepherd. Overnight, the swelling in the dog's back leg had worsened. Elias gently ran his fingers along the limb, checking for breaks. The dog whimpered at the pressure, but didn't pull away. Trust was forming, thin but real. Then Elias noticed something else. A faint line of raw skin above the hock. A perfect ring of abrasion, dug deep into the fur. He leaned closer. Wire burn. Someone had trapped him. Not caught in the wild by accident. Not a brush against a branch. The wound was too precise, too tight, the kind left by a snare designed to hold or drag. Who would set a snare big enough for a full-grown shepherd? And why? His stomach tightened. He examined the bigger dog next. The large shepherd stood patiently as Elias lifted the fur around the neck. That was when his breath caught. There it was, a small recessed port in the collar skin. Circular, metallic, a military microchip access point. Elias's pulse jumped. He knew that design. It was standard issue for elite K9 units used in defense training, federal search units, and certain classified programs he had only heard about during his SAR years. He traced the edge of the port with the tip of his finger. "You belong to someone important," he whispered. The dog held his gaze, unblinking. Elias could almost sense the thoughts behind those eyes, the weight of training, the instinct to protect something or someone. He stepped back, mind racing. 2 military-trained German shepherds, one injured by a snare, both showing signs of exhaustion, frostbite, and fear. Why were they loose in Cascade Mountain? How far had they traveled through the storm, and what had driven them to his cabin specifically? The larger dog suddenly tensed. No growl, no bark. Just a rigid stillness, ears angled towards the window. Elias followed his gaze. Outside, the snow lay in smooth, untouched drifts. But as he squinted through the glare, something disrupted the perfection. Footprints, human footprints, fresh. They cut a path from the wooded slope toward the edge of the clearing, stopping just short of the cabin. A single set, spaced evenly, moving with purpose. The snow still fell from a branch above them, meaning the tracks were no more than an hour old. Someone had come here while he slept. Someone had stood right outside. Elias's breath clouded against the cold window. He felt the hairs on his arms rise, mirroring the tension in the larger dog. No animal made prints like that. No lost hiker would be here after a storm like last night. Whoever walked that close to his cabin didn't knock, didn't call out, and didn't leave a sign of distress. They were searching, and it wasn't for firewood. The larger shepherd moved beside Elias, staring intently at the tracks. The dog's posture shifted, head lowering, chest forward, weight, balanced on all 4 paws. Ready, controlled, waiting for a command that wouldn't come. Elias whispered, "What were you running from?" The dog didn't look at him. He just stared at the tree line like it held the answer. Elias threw on his coat, grabbed his boots, and stepped outside. The cold slapped him awake as the door shut softly behind him. He crouched near the tracks. The depth, the crispness, the length of the stride told him one thing clearly. This wasn't a hunter. It was someone trained, someone strong, moving quickly, but not fleeing. They were tracking the dogs. A crack echoed in the woods. Elias straightened sharply. The large shepherd darted outside before he could react, placing himself between Elias and the forest. His body went rigid again, tail low, breath fogging the air like smoke. Elias scanned the trees, seeing nothing but the sway of pines. Then a flicker of black moved behind the ridge. Not an animal, a jacket, a shoulder disappearing behind cover. Elias's pulse spiked. Someone still out there. He backed toward the door. "All right, inside, now." The larger shepherd responded instantly, pushing the smaller one through the doorway with his head. Elias stepped in after them, locking the door out of instinct even though a lock meant little against determination. His mind worked fast. 2 trained shepherds, 1 military microchip, a snare injury, a man watching the cabin at sunrise. All of it pointed to one thing. They didn't escape a storm. They escaped people. Elias knelt beside the larger shepherd. The dog watched him with an intensity that bordered on human. Elias whispered, "Who was out there? Do you know him?" The dog's reaction was small but clear. A flicker of fear, then resolve. Elias felt the response like a chill down his spine. Plot twist, quick and sharp. The man out there wasn't searching for the dogs. He was hunting them. And whatever these two shepherds had escaped from in the mountains was about to find its way straight to his front door. The morning sun was thin and silver, barely warming the snow as Elias stepped outside with both German shepherds beside him. The larger dog walked ahead with quiet purpose, while the smaller one stayed close to Elias's leg, limping but determined. The storm had settled into a deceptive calm, a quiet that made every sound sharper, every shadow more suspicious. Elias crouched near the footprints he had seen earlier. Overnight, the wind had shifted the top layer of snow, but the tracks were still visible. Whoever had approached the cabin had circled, paused, and then retreated towards the tree line. A careful retreat, not a panicked one, not random, tracked, followed, hunted. Elias rose and followed the trail into the woods, the two dogs moving with him as if they had been his team for years. The larger shepherd scanned every direction, ears flicking, reading the environment with precise, practiced awareness. The smaller one lifted his head often, scenting the air, despite his injury. 100 yards from the cabin, they found the first clue, a length of metal snare wire half buried in snow. Elias lifted it, and the wire dangled stiffly, coated in ice. This wasn't homemade. It was reinforced steel cable, heavy enough for wolves or dogs. The loop at the end had fresh hair caught in the twist. German shepherd hair. He clenched his jaw, anger hitting hot in his chest. Someone had set this trap intentionally. Someone had expected these dogs. And someone was close. "Come on," he murmured. They moved deeper into the forest. The snow was broken in places where something heavy had been dragged. A disturbance marked the next clearing. Branches snapped. A patch of red stained the snow. Elias knelt beside it, feeling the frozen powder crumble beneath his fingers. The larger shepherd stepped forward and pressed his nose to the red mark. He didn't panic. He didn't retreat. Instead, he checked the perimeter, then returned to Elias with a low, steady huff. It wasn't the injured shepherd's blood. It had come from something else, or someone else. Elias stood, scanning the clearing. He spotted a dark shape under a fallen spruce. He approached slowly. A torn ration pack lay crumpled in the frost. He recognized the material immediately. Military-grade MRE packaging. He turned it over. The lettering was scuffed, but the stamped marking on the edge was unmistakable. Federal Training Unit. Canine Division. The snow around his boots blurred as memories surged forward. Ranger. His last mission. His last night in uniform. The flashback hit like a punch. He saw the ridge again, the snow giving way beneath Ranger's paws as they searched for the missing climber. He felt the rope jerk, heard his partner's bark echo into the ravine. Elias had held the line with everything he had, hands bleeding against the nylon, but the ridge collapsed and took Ranger down with it. He had crawled across the ground, screaming his dog's name into the canyon until his voice broke. They found Ranger's body hours later. It had been the only time Elias ever begged the mountain for mercy. He never returned to service after that. Elias swallowed hard, grounding himself back in the present. The shepherd stood close, watching him, as if sensing the shift in his breathing. "All right, boys," he whispered. "Let's keep moving." They continued through the clearing and down a narrow slope. Snow thinned near the creek, revealing churned patches of earth and prints of boots moving with force. Not one set, 2, maybe 3. Elias crouched again. The dogs stood beside him, noses twitching, muscles taut. Someone dragged something heavy here, or someone. As he examined the ground, the larger shepherd suddenly stepped ahead, nose low, tail stiff in a straight line. He moved like he'd caught a scent he recognized. The smaller dog, despite his leg, followed with surprising speed. Elias's pulse kicked. They weren't wandering. They were tracking. He hurried to keep up. The larger shepherd led him to a broken tree stump. Snow around it had been kicked up violently, like a struggle had taken place. And there, half hidden under a rock, Elias saw the next clue. A torn patch of fabric. Dark navy. Heavy nylon. Weather-resistant. An insignia embroidered in the corner. Federal Canine Handler Division. Elias stared at it, heart pounding. This wasn't random. These dogs weren't running away from danger. They were running toward help. He stood slowly, the truth settling on him like a final piece falling into place. The shepherds weren't seeking shelter out of fear. They were seeking him. The larger dog approached Elias and nudged his hand. Not for comfort, not for food, for direction, for decision. Elias knelt, his breath misting between them. "You're trying to lead me somewhere, aren't you?" The dog held his gaze. Solid, certain. Elias exhaled shakily. His voice came out low. "Someone is out there. Someone from your unit. Someone who didn't make it back. And you're asking me to help." The smaller shepherd limped forward and placed his head against Elias's knee, sealing the silent plea. A sharp crack echoed across the forest. Not a branch, not ice, gunfire. One single round, muffled by distance, but unmistakable. The dogs reacted instantly. The larger one bolted a few steps forward, barking once, urgent. The smaller dog, injured leg trembling, fought to follow. Elias didn't hesitate this time. "All right," he said. "Lead the way." The two German shepherds surged ahead, united in purpose, guiding him toward the sound that might be danger, might be hope, or might be the person they had crossed a storm to reach. For the first time since Ranger died, Elias Turner wasn't running from the mountains. He was running into them. The gunshot still echoed in Elias's chest, long after the sound faded into the forest. The two German shepherds pulled ahead through the snow, noses to the ground, following the scent with a sharp, disciplined urgency. Elias kept pace, boots breaking through the crust of ice with each step. Every instinct he once had in search and rescue roared awake inside him. 100 yards deeper, the trail shifted. The dogs suddenly froze, ears forward, bodies rigid. The larger shepherd let out a low growl, not of aggression, but warning. Elias raised a hand, scanning the trees. Someone was watching. A branch snapped just beyond the ridge. A figure stepped into view from behind a cluster of firs, bundled in a heavy parka, cheeks flushed from cold and exertion. A woman. She lifted both hands immediately. "I'm not here to hurt you." Elias tensed. "Who are you?" She exhaled mist into the cold air. "Name's Sierra Dalton, Wildlife Rescue Division, North Cascade Field Unit. I've been tracking those two shepherds for days." The dogs recognized her voice before Elias did. The larger shepherd's posture softened. His ears lowered, not fully, but enough to show he knew her scent. The smaller shepherd limped toward her, tail low, but wagging faintly. Elias didn't relax. Not yet. "Why were you following them?" Sierra approached carefully, kneeling to inspect the injured shepherd. Her movements were slow, practiced, skilled, the kind of touch someone used on animals they truly cared about. "Because they're not just lost dogs," she said quietly. "They're working animals, and they've been stolen." Elias felt the words hit harder than the cold. Stolen, not missing, not escaped. Stolen. Sierra glanced at the microchip port on the large shepherd's neck, then met Elias's eyes. "That's government issue. These two belong to a federal canine training contractor outside Spokane. 3 dogs were taken in a coordinated theft last week. These two made it out alive."
Elias swallowed. And the third? Sierra hesitated. Her breath hitched. He didn't come back with them. We've been searching since the night of the storm. The larger shepherd let out a short, broken bark. It wasn't random. It wasn't alert. It sounded like grief. Sierra placed a hand on his shoulder. I know, boy. We'll keep looking. I promise. Elias felt the moment press into him like a weight.
The big dog, Kodiak, Sierra called him later, leaned into her touch, calm for just a second before stepping back protectively towards the smaller shepherd. Sierra continued, I saw your cabin lights through the trees last night, but couldn't get close. Whoever stole these dogs, they were tracking them too. And whoever set that snare you found wasn't hunting by accident. The cold tightened around Elias's throat. There's someone else out here. More than someone, Sierra said. A group. A cross-state trafficking ring that targets trained canine dogs for the black market. Police, security, private buyers, whoever pays the most. These dogs are worth tens of thousands each. Elias felt his pulse spike. That's why they were snared. Sierra nodded grimly. And that's why the thieves want them back. They lost 2 prime animals, and they won't leave without trying to reclaim them. The forest suddenly felt
smaller, colder, more dangerous. Elias looked at the shepherds huddled close, snow caught in their fur, breath sharp and rapid. They weren't hiding in his cabin for safety. They had come seeking something specific, someone with experience, someone with instincts, someone like him. Sierra seemed to read the thought crossing his face. I know you saw their training. These aren't strays. These dogs don't panic. They choose. And they chose you because they thought you could help. Elias didn't answer. Not immediately. He stared at the clearing ahead, the broken snow, the remnants of someone moving through the woods with intent. Sierra stood. We need to get them back to the wildlife center. We have medgear, shelter, reinforced kennels, and we can call the authorities before the traffickers circle back. The larger shepherd stepped between her and Elias, blocking her subtly but firmly. His tail rose slightly, his head tilted. A silent message. Elias knelt beside him, hand pressing lightly against the dog's chest. You don't want to go back, do you? The dog didn't move, didn't blink. The smaller shepherd nudged Elias's elbow, whining softly, as if echoing the plea. Sierra watched the interaction with surprise. I've never seen them respond like that. They barely let us near them at the training center sometimes. But with you... Elias looked from Sierra to the dogs, then back to the forest. He felt the thin line pulling him between 2 choices. Let the professionals take over, or trust the instincts of the very animals who crossed a blizzard to reach him. A faint crunch of snow echoed behind them. All 3 shepherds snapped to attention, heads turning in unison. Elias and Sierra whipped around. Footprints, new ones, coming from the direction opposite Sierra. Sierra's eyes widened. That's not me, Kodiak growled, a deep, rolling sound that made Elias freeze. They were surrounded. Elias whispered, Sierra, listen carefully. She gripped the tranquilizer pack on her belt, eyes narrowing. What? Elias stood slowly, positioning himself at the front of the pack. They didn't run here by accident. They're not looking for shelter. He looked at the dogs, then at Sierra. They're looking for someone who can save the third one. And they chose me. The forest answered with another crunch of snow, closer this time. Elias felt the instinct rise in his chest again, the same one he'd buried after losing Ranger, the same pull that made him run toward danger instead of away. He glanced at the dogs. Stay close, all of you. The shepherds obeyed instantly, and in that moment, Elias realized something with absolute clarity. This wasn't just their fight anymore, it was his. By late afternoon, the sky started closing in. The light went flat first, draining color from the trees until the forest looked like an old photograph. Then the wind shifted. It stopped skimming across the snow and began to press down on it, heavy and slow, like a hand searching in the dark. Sierra stood on the porch, hood up, eyes narrowed at the horizon. "That wall is moving fast," she said quietly. Elias followed her gaze. A grey curtain rolled over the far ridge, swallowing the peaks one by one. The temperature dropped so quickly his breath turned to fog the moment it left his mouth. Inside the cabin, the two German shepherds were restless. The larger one paced from door to window, nails clicking on the boards, pausing at each crack of wind. The smaller shepherd limped in circles, nose lifted, whining under his breath as if responding to something only he could hear. "They know," Sierra murmured. "Animals always feel storms before we do." The wind hit them like a freight train. Snow whipped sideways, stinging any exposed skin. The porch creaked under the sudden pressure. Somewhere in the distance a tree snapped, the sound sharp and final. The larger shepherd stopped pacing. He moved to the door, planted his paws, and let out a long, ringing bark into the storm. It was not random. It was a call. The smaller dog joined him, lifting his head despite the pain in his leg and adding his own voice. The two howls braided together, rising above the wind, echoing off unseen rock faces. Elias felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. "Who are they calling to?" Sierra swallowed. "The third dog," she said. Her voice was low. "Sure. Wherever he is out there, he hears this. He has to." The big shepherd barked again, shorter this time, urgent. Then he turned and locked eyes with Elias. The message was clear. "Go." Elias grabbed his coat. "We cannot wait. If that third dog is still moving, this storm will finish the job." Sierra hesitated only a heartbeat before nodding. "My snowmobile is fueled. We have maybe 1 or 2 hours before visibility goes to 0. If we are not back by then, we dig in and ride it out wherever we are." The cabin became a blur of motion. Elias stuffed emergency blankets, hand warmers, a compact stove, and a small tent into a sled pack. Sierra checked tranq darts and bandages, then slung a radio and a flare kit over her shoulder. He glanced at the injured shepherd. "You are not coming, buddy. Not this time." The dog whined, attempted to stand, then sank back down. The larger shepherd walked over, nosed his muzzle as if promising something, then trotted back to the door. "I think that one comes with us," Sierra said. "We will never track the third without him." Elias nodded. He opened the door. The storm shoved its way in. Snow stabbed his face. The world outside had become a swirling tunnel of white. Sierra shouted something, but the wind tore the words away. Together they fought their way to the snowmobile parked beside the cabin. The large shepherd jumped into the sled behind it without being told, settling low. "Ready." Elias secured the gear around him. Sierra swung onto the seat and pulled goggles over her eyes. "Ready," she yelled. "Not even close," Elias muttered, but he climbed on behind her and braced himself. The engine roared to life, a raw mechanical sound in the wild quiet. Sierra gunned the throttle, and they shot forward into the white. Snow rushed past them in blurs. The wind clawed at his coat, trying to peel him off. Elias clung to Sierra with one arm and kept his other hand on the sled rope, feeling every shift in weight from the shepherd behind them. The dog was standing now, hacking through the snow with his nose, barking once to the right, twice to the left. Sierra adjusted their path with each cue, trusting his instincts more than any GPS. They followed a valley cut, then veered up a low ridge, the snowmobile bucking under them. Trees loomed out of the storm in sudden ghostly shapes. Sierra dodged them by a hair, the sled skidding behind. The shepherd barked again, sharp and insistent. He lunged to the right, paws scraping the sled side. "He wants us to turn," Elias yelled. Sierra did not question it. She leaned into the turn, carving through the snow toward a cluster of dark boulders jutting from the white. Something dark lay at the base of the largest rock. At first, Elias thought it was a branch. Then the shape twitched. Sierra cut the engine. Silence crashed down, thick and smothering. Even the wind seemed to dim for a second. The large shepherd jumped from the sled before Elias could stop him. He bounded through the snow, skidding to a halt beside the dark shape and letting out a howl that rattled Elias to the core. The third German shepherd was half buried in drifted snow. He lay on his side, ribs visible, breath shallow. Ice crusted his whiskers. One eye was barely open, the other was swollen shut. His paws were raw to the skin, as if he had run until there was nothing left but pain and willpower. Elias dropped to his knees beside him. Hey, easy! You are not done yet." The third dog's gaze flickered, trying to focus. Recognition passed between him and the larger shepherd, who nudged his neck anxiously, whining in a way Elias had never heard from a working dog. Sierra knelt on the other side and put her gloved hand to the third dog's chest. "Faint but there," she said. "He is hanging on." She moved efficiently, slipping an emergency blanket under his body, then over the top, wrapping him like a fragile package. Elias supported the dog's head, feeling the weak warmth of his breath against his wrist. "You followed them," he whispered, "through the storm, alone." The dog made a tiny sound, almost a sigh. They got him into the sled, bracing his body between packs so he would not roll. The larger shepherd squeezed beside him, pressing close, sharing his heat without hesitation. Their noses touched. The third dog's eyes fluttered once, then closed again. Sierra climbed back onto the snowmobile. "We have to move. Now, he does not have many hours left." Elias checked the clouds. The grey had darkened to something close to black. Snow fell in thick sheets now, each flake more like a shard of glass than ice. He did the math in his head. Distance back to the cabin. Visibility dropping. Fuel. Shelter. He knew the answer before he said it. "We are not getting back tonight." Sierra revved the engine but did not move. She knew he was right. "Out here, arrogance cost lives. There is a ravine 30 minutes from here." She shouted over the wind. "Old ranger cache near the tree line. Stores, tarps, maybe a stove if we are lucky. If we try for the cabin and the wind shifts, we could end up blind on open ice." Elias looked at the three shepherds crammed into the sled. Two conscious, one fading, all trusting them to choose right. "We go to the cache," he said. "We dig in and wait for a break." Sierra nodded once. "Hang on." The next half hour was chaos. They drove through a world with no horizon. The ground tilted unexpectedly, snow drifts hiding rocks and fallen logs. Twice the snowmobile lurched violently, and Elias thought they would tip. Each time Sierra wrestled it back under control. The large shepherd planted his paws and braced, keeping his body between the worst of the jolts and the third dog. Whenever the sled jerked, he adjusted, acting like a living brace, a shield. Elias glanced back more than once, and every time he saw the same thing: loyalty in motion. Finally, Sierra pointed. There, through the curtain of snow, a dark shape took form. An old ranger hut, half sunken into a rocky slope, its roof sagging but intact. Two buried barrels beside it marked what used to be a supply drop. They pulled up hard, engine sputtering as Sierra killed it. The silence that followed was not peace. It was the kind of quiet that came before decisions. Inside. "Now," Elias said. They hauled the sled to the door. The latch was frozen, but a solid shove from Elias cracked it open. The air inside was stale, laced with the ghosts of coffee and oil and years of cold. There was no time to clean. They dragged the third dog to the back wall, laid him on blankets as Sierra fired up a compact stove from the emergency kit. The larger shepherd refused to leave his side, curling around him full body, chest pressed to chest, sharing every degree of warmth he had. The smaller injured shepherd limped in a moment later, having followed their trail all the way from the cabin. He must have pushed through the pain and the storm alone. He stumbled through the doorway, found his pack without hesitation, and collapsed beside them, pressing his head under the third dog's jaw. Elias stared at the three of them, the quiet, aching persistence of their bond. "We did not rescue him," he said softly. "They did. We just gave them a ride." Outside, the storm hit full force. Snow hammered the roof. Wind clawed at the walls, trying to pry the hut apart. The world beyond became a churning void. Inside, 4 humans and 3 dogs huddled under thin shelter. The line between life and death narrowed to a small circle of heat and breath. Sierra checked the third dog's pulse again. It was still there, faint but stubborn. "He's not letting go," she whispered. "Neither are they," Elias said. The larger shepherd lifted his head slightly, eyes meeting Elias's. There was nothing wild in that look, only a clear, steady expectation. "Do your part." Elias took a slow breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle firmly on his shoulders. He reached for the radio, for the flares, for every tool he had ever used to pull someone back from the edge. Ranger had died on a night like this. Tonight he was not losing another dog to the mountain. Not if he could help it. The storm broke just before dawn. A grey, bruised light seeped through the cracks in the ranger hut, turning the air from pitch black to the color of cold steel. Elias woke to the low hum of the wind dying down and the soft, steady breathing of the 3 German shepherds huddled together beside him. Against all odds, the third dog was still alive. Sierra checked him first, brushing melting frost from his muzzle. His breathing was shallow but no longer ragged. He had survived the night. "He made it," she whispered, half in disbelief. Before Elias could reply, a burst of static snapped through the radio sitting on the crate beside them. "Elias, Sierra, do you copy? This is Deputy Hartman, search and rescue. We're approaching your coordinates. Flare if you can." Sierra grabbed the radio. "We read you. 3 dogs in critical condition. 1 hypothermic, 2 exhausted. We need medical evac now. Understood. We're 10 minutes out." 10 minutes. After a night that felt like a year, it sounded unreal. Sierra handed Elias a flare. He stepped out of the hut into a world transformed. Snow drifts taller than a man leaned against the rock walls. Ice coated the branches like glass armor. The storm had torn half the forest apart, ripping down small trees and carving strange, smooth patterns across the ravine floor. He raised the flare. The red fire cracked alive, hissing in the cold. 5 minutes later, the first engine growled through the quiet. A pair of snowmobiles crested the ridge, followed by a wide-track rescue transport with SRR decals and the sheriff's emblem on the side. Elias had never been so relieved to see bright orange jackets in his life. Deputy Hartman jumped off first, boots sinking in the deep snow. "You two picked one hell of a night to be heroes." Elias gave a tired, hollow laugh. "Trust me, this wasn't on the agenda." Medics moved fast. They wrapped the third shepherd in insulated foil blankets, secured IV lines, and checked his airway. The dog did not resist. He was too far gone for fear. But when the larger shepherd barked anxiously, they slowed, letting him see every movement before lifting his packmate onto the stretcher. "Easy, big guy," a medic murmured. "He's safe now." The large shepherd's ears flicked at Elias. He stayed pressed against the stretcher until the medics guided him toward another transport crate. The smaller shepherd limped over on his injured leg, refusing to be separated from the others. A medic knelt and offered him a hand to sniff. "You've been through a war out here, haven't you?" Sierra walked beside them, directing the team, explaining their injuries, the trail they'd followed, the trap they discovered. Hartman listened, jaw set. Then he turned to Elias. "You said something last night in your radio message. About a microchip." Elias nodded. "On the big one. Military issue, which means someone didn't just lose these dogs, someone took them." Hartman's expression hardened. "That lines up with something we've been chasing. There's been chatter about a ring smuggling working K9s across state lines. Law enforcement, military, AR dogs, high-value animals." Elias felt his stomach twist. They weren't strays, they were targets. Sierra stepped closer. "And whoever took them is probably still looking. These boys didn't just escape, they ran for help." Hartman looked at them both. Then he thumbed his radio and spoke, quickly to dispatch. "Get a trace on any active military microchip signals in a 20-mile radius. Now." Minutes later, dispatch answered. "Ping detected. Moving west. Fast." Hartman's jaw clenched. "That's someone running." Sierra's breath caught. The smugglers. Elias felt a low, simmering anger rise in him, something he hadn't felt since his SAR days. Ranger had died because of a reckless handler on a night not unlike this one. And here he stood again, watching another set of working dogs suffer because of human greed. Hartman turned to him. "You were SAR, right, Turner. We could use your expertise." Elias opened his mouth to refuse. He'd promised himself he was done. No more cold nights, no more broken animals, no more responsibility. But then he looked at the two conscious shepherds pressed against the stretcher carrying their dying brother. They were watching him. Not as a stranger, as someone who had saved them once already. He swallowed hard. If it helps them, I'm in. Within the hour, 2 patrol units, 3 SAR teams, and a wildlife officer had mobilized along the valley. The storm had erased most tracks, but not the microchip signal. It pulsed steadily on the screen in the command truck. Sierra leaned over Hartman's shoulder. "Whoever they are, they're not far." Elias stood behind them, arms crossed, eyes sharp. "That direction leads to the service road. They'll try for a pickup point." Hartman nodded. "We'll intercept before they hit Highway 2. What followed happened fast. A fleeing snowmobile. 2 men. A crate strapped to the back. When they saw flashing lights, they bolted towards the tree line. Hartman's voice split the air. "Go!" SAR units flanked from the left. Deputies closed from the right. Elias found himself running uphill on instinct, lungs burning, snow kicking behind him. He hadn't moved like this since before Ranger died. But his muscles remembered. His breath remembered. His purpose remembered. The smugglers reached the ridge. Elias reached them first. He stepped into their path. One man swung a metal rod. Elias dodged, grabbed his wrist, and shoved him backward into the snow. The second man tried to gun the snowmobile, but Hartman tackled him cleanly from behind. Both men were cuffed within seconds. The crate rattled violently. Sierra burst forward, snapped the latch, and ripped the door open. Inside was a trembling young Malinois, ribs sticking out, paws bloody. Terrified. Starved. Alive. She exhaled hard. They took more than just the shepherds. By the time the last smuggler was shoved into the back of a patrol truck, the sun was breaking through the clouds. A thin gold line touched the frozen valley like a promise of something better. Elias stepped aside, catching his breath. His heartbeat slowed. His pulse steadied. For 4 years he'd carried Ranger's death like a locked weight in his chest. This morning, for the first time, it felt like it was shifting. Not gone, but lighter. Sierra walked over. "How does it feel being back in it?" He watched the medics loading the 3 German shepherds into the transport. The large shepherd looked at him, ears pricked, tail low but wagging once. "Like maybe I'm not broken anymore," Elias said quietly. Sierra smiled. "They trusted you. Dogs don't pick the wrong people." Elias took a long breath and let it out into the cold, clean air of the Cascades. Something inside him finally clicked back into place. The Cascades looked different a year later. Not softer, not kinder, just more familiar, like the mountains finally recognized him again. Elias Turner pulled into the gravel lot of the newly expanded K9 Recovery and Training Center, a place built from the ashes of the smuggling ring he helped dismantle. The morning sun stretched long beams across the frost-tipped fields. A cold breeze carried the scent of pine, damp soil, and something else he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Sierra had invited him for months, but he needed time. A year seemed like the right distance from the storm that had nearly taken them all. He stepped out of the truck, boots crunching against frozen gravel. Voices drifted across the yard, trainers calling commands, dogs responding with eager barks. Steel fencing lined the perimeter, enclosing acres of rolling grass and obstacle courses. A far cry from the cramped kennels the dogs had been stolen for. This was a place built to give them their lives back. Sierra spotted him before he reached the gate. She jogged over, her jacket zipped halfway, her hair pulled into a tight ponytail. "You actually came," she said, breath fogging in the cool air. Elias gave a half smile. "Figured it was time." She nudged his shoulder lightly. "They'll be glad to see you." Inside the training yard, dogs sprinted through tunnels, leapt over platforms, and waited at attention as trainers gave them calm, steady commands. These were not fragile animals anymore. They were athletes again. Working dogs. Warriors. Then a familiar bark cut through the morning. Deep, strong, sharp like a bell rung in his memory. Elias stopped walking. Across the yard, 3 German shepherds had been resting near the shade of a cedar tree. Now all 3 stood, alert, tails raised in cautious curiosity. Kodiak was the first to move. He was bigger than Elias remembered, muscle built back, coat thick and glossy, but his eyes were exactly the same as the night he'd scratched at the cabin door. Gold-flecked, sharp, searching. He took a single step forward, nose lifted as if tasting the air. Recognition landed between them like a spark. Then Kodiak broke into a run. Sierra stepped back on instinct as the shepherd barreled across the yard, throwing snow and dirt behind him. Elias braced himself, but Kodiak slowed just before reaching him, lowering his head, tail thumping once, twice, heavy with emotion he couldn't hide. "Hey there, big guy," Elias whispered. Kodiak pressed his forehead to Elias's chest. The contact hit him harder than he expected. Warmth, weight, trust. Emotions he'd kept locked away since Ranger's death flooded back in a slow, steady wave. The smaller shepherd, Scout, and the third survivor, Hawk, approached more cautiously, circling Elias, sniffing his boots, his hands, the hem of his jacket. Scout let out a soft chuff of confirmation. Hawk nudged Elias's elbow, demanding acknowledgement. Elias crouched, and 3 heads leaned into him at once. Sierra stood back, arms crossed, a smile slowly forming. "They never react to anyone like that," she said softly. "Kodiak watches the gate every morning. We think he's waiting for something, or someone." Elias ran his fingers through Kodiak's thick fur. "You remember that night, don't you? That awful storm, those tracks in the snow?" Kodiak huffed and nudged closer, as if answering yes. A trainer approached, keeping respectful distance. "They've been thriving," he said. "Strong drive, excellent memory, 0 aggression issues. You saved them at the exact moment they needed it." Elias shook his head. They saved themselves. "I just opened a door." Sierra tilted her head, and somehow ended up helping rebuild an entire program. "You want the full tour?" He rose to his feet. "Lead the way." They walked along the perimeter, Kodiak and Scout flanking him like sentinels, Hawk trotting ahead and checking their path, Sierra explained how the center had grown, how donations poured in after the smuggling case hit national news, how trainers from across the state volunteered, wanting to rehabilitate and reassign working dogs who'd been abused or abandoned, and how Kodiak and his brothers had become the heart of the place. "They're like ambassadors now," Sierra said, "living proof that resilience has teeth." As they reached the far fence line, a gust of wind drifted down from the ridge. Elias paused, looking toward the distant mountains. He hadn't climbed those slopes since the night of the rescue. The memory of that temporary shelter, the howling storm, the fragile life hanging in the balance. It all felt closer now, but not painful. Not anymore. Sierra watched him carefully. "You look lighter. Maybe I am," he said. "Maybe this is the first time the cold doesn't feel empty." Kodiak leaned against his leg, weight solid and grounding. Elias rested a hand on the dog's back, steady and present. This moment, quiet, simple, felt like the closure he didn't know he needed. Sierra pointed toward an open training field. "They're almost ready for reassignment. Some agencies want them. But truthfully, they only fully trust one person." Elias blinked. "Don't look at me." Kodiak barked once, as if disagreeing on principle. Scout mirrored him with a sharp, playful sound. Hawk sat, ears perked, eyes locked on Elias like a student awaiting instruction. Sierra grinned. "The votes are in, and they're unanimous." The breeze shifted. A line of sunlight cut through the clouds and landed on the dogs, warm and golden. Kodiak's eyes glowed when he lifted his head, the same look he gave Elias on that frozen night in the Cascades, the look that said he wasn't begging for shelter. He was choosing someone. Elias swallowed hard. "Let me think about it," he said softly. "Take all the time you need," Sierra replied. But the shepherds didn't move. They sat in a perfect triangle around him, waiting, trusting, believing. Elias Turner exhaled into the crisp air, the sound steady and sure as the mountains around them. For the first time in years, the quiet didn't feel like isolation. It felt like coming home. By spring, the Cascades shook off their winter armor. Snow thawed into clear streams. Pines stood brighter. Trails reopened. And the Canine Recovery and Training Center was no longer just a local rescue project. It had become a movement. Elias Turner parked beside the main building, stepping out into a morning humming with purpose. Volunteers unloaded supplies from pickup trucks. Trainers ran drills on the open field. Reporters waited near the front gate, their cameras aimed at a tall banner reading, "K9 Second Chance Program Rehabilitation, Redeployment, Redemption." Sierra appeared in the doorway, clipboard tucked under her arm, cheeks flushed from the cold. "Perfect timing," she said. "They're all waiting for you inside." Elias raised an eyebrow. "For me," she smirked, "you're the last co-founder to arrive." The word co-founder still felt strange. A year ago, he'd been a man hiding from the world in a wooden cabin, living off routine and regret. Now he was standing in the middle of a program built on everything he once believed in. Inside the briefing room, handlers, trainers, SAR officers, and a few military representatives filled the seats. At the center of the room sat Kodiak, Scout, and Hawk, the founding trio. Kodiak wore a new vest marked with the program's emblem. His posture was perfect, head high, eyes alert. He looked like he was listening, absorbing everything. Deputy Hartman stepped forward. "Before we begin, I want to acknowledge the man without whom none of this would exist." Elias felt every gaze shift to him. His chest tightened. Hartman continued. He found them. He protected them. He exposed a smuggling network. And he reminded us that working dogs are not tools, they're partners. Kodiak trotted over, sitting at Elias's side with military precision. A low, proud rumble vibrated in his chest. Sierra stepped up next. Today marks the official launch of the Canine Second Chance program. Our mission is simple: give abandoned, injured, or exploited working dogs the chance to heal, retrain, and rejoin the world with dignity. She glanced at Kodiak. And we have a living symbol to lead the way. The room quieted as Kodiak climbed onto the small stage beside her. Sierra gestured toward him. When he arrived here, he was starving, freezing, and terrified. Now he's one of our top search and rescue candidates. Kodiak scanned the room, meeting each face with calm confidence, as though understanding the weight placed on his shoulders. Elias watched from the side. He felt something shift inside him, a soft unlocking. It wasn't just the dogs who were healing. When the meeting dispersed, Sierra and Elias walked the training grounds together. Volunteers exercised dogs recovering from surgeries. Trainers worked with anxious rescues, rebuilding trust one gentle command at a time. Across the yard, a Border Patrol officer was evaluating a Belgian Malinois recently rescued from an illegal breeder. Nearby, 2 veterans ran confidence drills with a retired bomb sniffer learning companion skills for PTSD support. "This isn't just rescue work anymore," Elias said. "It's rebuilding lives." Sierra nodded. On both ends of the leash, a light breeze stirred the air. Elias inhaled, recognizing scents of cut grass, warm fur, disinfectant, and fresh coffee. It felt like purpose. They stopped near the field where Kodiak was demonstrating a search drill for the new volunteers. He tracked a scent trail through obstacles, weaving between cones with sharp precision, then signaled the find with a clean, strong bark. The trainees applauded. Elias felt pride well in his chest, quiet, steady, earned. He finally spoke. "I didn't think I'd ever want to be involved in this world again. After Ranger, I didn't think I could." Sierra stepped closer, her voice low. "But these dogs pulled you back." "Not just back," Elias said. "Forward." They watched as Kodiak trotted toward them, tongue lolling slightly. He sat in front of Elias and nudged his hand firmly, like a reminder. "Ranger was part of your story, but he wasn't the end of it." Elias knelt, pressing his forehead against Kodiak's. The shepherd exhaled softly, leaning in, trust flowing in both directions. After a long moment, Sierra spoke. "We've been offered federal funding, enough to double the size of the program. More dogs, more lives saved, but they want leadership that understands both sides, the field work and the loss it leaves behind." Elias looked up. "You want me to lead it?" Sierra smiled. "I think you already are." A group of volunteers called for her attention, and she jogged off, leaving Elias standing with Kodiak under the wide blue sky. He felt the weight of the past year settle into something solid, something worth holding. Legacy wasn't a statue or a plaque. Legacy was a living creature pressing its head into your chest because you'd given him a second chance. Legacy was a program built from tragedy, now turning into hope. Legacy was purpose rediscovered, breath by breath, step by step. Elias rose, placing a hand on Kodiak's back. "Come on, big guy," he said. "Let's get to work." Kodiak barked once, clear, bright, ready, and trotted beside him as they stepped into the future they had built together. The studio lights felt warmer than Elias expected. Softer, almost like the glow from the old fireplace in his cabin the night everything changed. The cameras were arranged in a half-moon arc, each one waiting, unblinking, as if listening for the part of the story that only he could give. Beside him, Kodiak lay with perfect posture, head high, chest steady, eyes calm but alert. A presence, a partner, a reminder that the wildest night of his life had led him here. The interviewer, a local journalist named Megan Rhodes, adjusted her mic and offered a gentle smile. She'd already walked the audience through the K-9 Second Chance program, the rescue operations, the federal support, the growing impact. But now she leaned in slightly, voice softer. Elias, everyone's been asking the same question since your story went public. That night in the Cascades, how did you know they weren't dangerous? Elias breathed in slowly. He didn't look at Megan. He looked down at the German shepherd sitting beside him. Kodiak met his gaze with the same quiet intensity he had in the storm, in the makeshift shelter, and in the training yard a year later. He rested a hand gently on Kodiak's head. I didn't, he said. Not really. He let a beat of silence sit between them, letting the truth settle. He did. Kodiak trusted me before I trusted myself. That was the real difference. Megan tilted her head. So the instinct wasn't yours. Elias smiled faintly. No. That night, I was a man running from grief. He was a dog running toward hope. The only reason I opened that door was because he asked me to, and somehow he knew I'd listen. The camera operator leaned in, zooming. The studio lights reflected in Kodiak's eyes, bright, steady, carrying stories he could never speak but always convey. Megan glanced at the monitor. Viewers keep saying his eyes look like he understands every word. Elias nodded. He does. Dogs like him always do. A producer signaled from behind the glass. 1 minute left. Megan clasped her hands. Before we close, is there anything you want people to take away from your story? Anything you want them to remember long after this interview ends? Elias looked straight into the primary camera. The red tally light glowed, signaling he was live to thousands of homes across Washington. His voice dropped into something honest, grounded, unvarnished. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that loyalty isn't something you train. It's something you earn. Kodiak didn't care about my past. He didn't care what I'd done or what I'd lost. He just needed someone to believe in him. And he believed in me first. He paused, letting the moment breathe. Then he asked, clear and true, "What's your story with a loyal pet?" The words hung in the studio air. Simple, open, a bridge between every viewer and every memory they'd ever had of a dog that refused to give up on them. Kodiak leaned closer to Elias, resting his head against his thigh. Not dramatic, not posed, just real. Megan closed her notes. That might be the most powerful closing line we've had on this show. The cameras powered down one by one. The studio lights softened. Crew members quietly applauded. But Elias didn't stand yet. He ran a hand along Kodiak's shoulders, feeling the warm, steady breath of a dog who had rewritten his life. Sierra appeared from backstage, arms crossed, smiling. "He loves the camera," she said. Kodiak flicked an ear at her, unimpressed. "He likes being understood," Elias corrected. As the three of them walked toward the exit, the studio doors opened to a cool afternoon breeze. Outside, a few children waited with their parents, holding small posters with pictures of German shepherds and words like heroes and thank you, Kodiak. Kodiak sat calmly, letting the kids pet him one by one, eyes soft, patient. A symbol, Sierra had called him. But he was more than that. He was living proof that second chances weren't given. They were chosen. As Elias stepped into the sunlight, he looked back once at the camera crew packing up, at the small studio where the story had finally found its ending. Not the kind that closes a book, the kind that opens a door. He called to Kodiak. Ready to go home, Kodiak trotted to his side, tail sweeping once across the pavement like a signature stroke on a finished canvas. Elias lifted his face to the breeze, feeling the mountains somewhere beyond the skyline. The chill didn't sting anymore. The silence didn't ache. "Come on, buddy," he said. "We've got more dogs to help." Kodiak barked once, bright, confident, full of promise. And together they walked toward the next chapter waiting for them, leaving the audience with one final message echoing in their hearts. Share your story. Honor your loyal companion. And support the German Shepherd community, because their courage changes lives every day.